Our meeting for July. Again, trying to get up to 850 or more in our gun shows. And we want to have a picnic / shoots and fest in the fall, a VGCA picnic somewhere where we can also have access to a range and do some shooting, because we're a gun club. Okay, finally, get to the presentation. The Winder Musket, the Winchester Winder Musket. Show of hands, how many people here have a gun regret? They saw a gun on an auction and forgot to bid on it. They saw a gun at a gun show and walked out of there and days later said, man, I should have bought that. Any regrets? Back in the early 90s, I was into single shot rifles, and I was stationed in Oklahoma. I went to the Oklahoma City gun show out at the fairgrounds, and there was a single shot 22 short Winchester, but it was $500, and Captain Rob Becker had never spent $500 on a gun before. And I thought about that gun for years, literally years, until last fall I finally picked one up. But that's a gun show regret I had, and that's kind of the basis of tonight's meeting. This is what we're going to go over real quick. Why there was a Winder musket, who the heck was Winder, what's the design based on, the variations, and the source, my sources for the presentation. Turn of the last century, fought a war with Spain, Spanish-American War. We call them lessons learned now. Their after-action report from the Spanish-American War said, Army marksmanship and naval gunnery was pretty poor against the Spaniards. Now, the Spaniards, in most cases, were worse than us, but ours was bad. And so, in the first decade of the 20th century, 1900, 1910, there was a lot of interest in the Army and in Congress to improve marksmanship, to have a pool of trained people in the civilian world that if we ever had to mobilize again, that we're not starting from scratch, that we've got people that's got some basis in shooting. And I went back and looked at some census data. Back in the Civil War, 80% of our population was rural, only 20% was urban, and urban was defined as a city of 5,000 or more. It's a pretty small town. By the 1900s, you see that's shifted quite a bit. By 1910, it's almost 50-50. And oh, by the way, the last census said we're 20% rural, 80% urban. So as the population became more urban, they didn't have to rely on guns to put, rabbits in the pot. So the marksmanship and the familiarity with firearms had decreased significantly in the United States. So again, they wanted to ensure a pool of sufficiently trained recruits in the event of a future mobilization. Congress approved the Civilian Marksmanship Program in 1903. And then it was followed by the Department of Civilian Marksmanship, which was created in 1960. They needed something to train people with, something that wasn't a full caliber, a service caliber, with ferocious recoil and expensive ammo, but had the same length and weight as a service gun, and as you'll see here, used the same sights as a service gun. So they needed to design something. Somebody needed to come up with something that would meet that criteria. Who was that guy? Colonel Charles Blish Winder Jr. And before anyone asks, I was not able to determine if Blish, his middle name, means he's related to the Blish patent, which was the Blish block in the Thompson submachine gun. It was based on the Blish patent. I don't know. But you can see there he's born in 1874, died 1921, competitive shooter, big-time competitive shooter. He won the Leach Cup in 1903. The Leach Cup is in this building somewhere. I thought it might be in the museum. I was wrong. We think it's with the competition folks, and they're all out at the SHOT Show. I was hoping to get it down here. It is the oldest trophy awarded for marksmanship in the world. The Leach Cup. It goes back to 1874, and I'll talk about that in a second. He won that for long-range competition in 1903. He was a member of the 1908 Olympic team, and they won a gold medal as part of the team military rifle event. He was in the Ohio National Guard, early aviator, learned to fly in 1912. At that time, military aviators were trained by either the Wright brothers or Glenn Curtiss. He was trained by Glenn Curtiss. His aviator's license was number 130 here in the United States. Groundbreaking. Big on marksmanship, early aviator, advocated for marksmanship training with the Guard and with ROTC cadets. Camp Perry was established in 1907, and I've seen articles that speculated he was involved with the site survey team that helped select Camp Perry for our future rifle range, National Rifle Range. Okay, here's the guy with the idea, the guy with the plan. What are we going to use? The Winchester Model 1885. We're going to go back a couple of decades. It was designed by a 23-year-old man named John Moses Browning in 1878. He patented it the next year, 1879, and he sold that patent to Winchester in 1883. Why? There's a whole story behind this too. But my question is, why did Winchester want to buy a single-shot rifle when they had the 1873? They're big in the lever actions, repeaters. You know, why would they take a retrograde step? Why would they go backwards to a single shot? Well, we'll talk about that here in a second. They had a salesman, Charles Benton, heading out west. He happened upon the Browning Brothers gun shop out in Utah. And what caught his eye initially was they had a hand reloading tool that looked like it might infringe on a patent that Winchester had. So he bought one, sent it back to the lawyers, and they said, yeah, it infringes on a patent. You know, they can't be doing that. And this is the time when Winchester's stomping on people. Anybody that they think is impacting their market share, they went to war with Colt over shotguns. They dumped a whole bunch of shotguns below cost in the market, drove Colt out of the shotgun market. This is all happening at the same time. They're getting being very aggressive to preserve their market share. But they weren't coming after the Brownings on their hand loading tool because they wanted this rifle. The Browning brothers were hand making these. They made about 100-ish. Mark, you've been out to the museum. Do you recall how many they think they made before the Winchester patent? Before they sold the patent to Winchester? I saw 100. I don't know, but nobody knows. Anyway, they said, okay, sell us all your reloading tools. You know, don't make any more, but we want to buy the patent on this gun. And he said, okay, that sounds good. The Winchester engineers played around with it for a couple of years, made a couple of improvements, and they brought it out as the Model 1885. The Model 1885, they had two major variants. The high wall is on top, and the low wall is on the bottom. The high wall, you can see where the receiver sides go up, and they cover the falling block, as well as part of the trigger. That was for more high-power cartridges. It also took a bigger barrel shank. The low wall took a slightly smaller barrel shank. The part that screwed into the receiver was slightly smaller in diameter. And you can see where the receiver is cut away a little bit. You can see more of the falling block and more of the hammer. But again, the question is, why did Winchester want a single shot in 1883? And the reason is, long-range competition was becoming a big deal in the United States in the late 1870s and the 1880s. Creedmoor. The Creedmoor Range on Long Island was started in 1872, out to a 1,000-yard range. In 1874 was the first international competition we held there. The leading European team was a bunch of Irishmen shooting Rigby muzzleloaders. They were the European champs. They came to the United States. Their team captain, a Major Leach, commissioned and brought with him a cup, a sterling silver cup, that was going to be the prize for whoever won this competition. He brought it fully expecting that the Irish were going to turn around and take it back home with them, but they lost. They lost to this upstart American team shooting American rifles. If you look in this picture here, you see a couple of Sharps, you see a couple of Remington rolling blocks, and a couple in the back I can't identify. Big publicity, big thing. I mean, this is the day before radio and television and all that. This was news. Americans beat the Europeans best, and they did it with American rifles, and not one of those rifles is a Winchester. Okay? Like I said, the Leach Cup is still around. It's still presented to the best long-range marksman out of Camp Perry every year. And it's, like I said, it's in this building somewhere. Okay, so that's why Winchester wanted it. They got the 1885 out of it. Now, again, bouncing back forward about 20 years, Winder comes up with the criteria for what he thinks is going to be a good practice rifle for civilians. He started to work on it in about 1904, working with Winchester. He came up with, we're going to use the high wall action. We're going to, with the larger barrel shank, we're going to use a 28-inch barrel chambered in 22 rimfire, either short, long, or long rifle. It's going to be the same length and weight as a service gun. So you got used to hefting it and shooting it in the various positions like a service gun. Commercially, the 1885, which had been around for 20 years, was available in all sorts of calibers and all sorts of barrel lengths. You can get it with double set triggers and single set triggers and a gajillion different options. But these were the criteria that he wanted for this match rifle. The sling swivels were made so it could handle the 1907 leather sling, which everybody uses for setting up for good marksmanship. And then it had a full-length forearm with barrel bands. Okay, there were, collectors recognized three variants, three different versions of the Winder musket. The first is variation 1. It's produced from 1904 to 1911. About 9,300-ish were made. Most of them were in 22 long rifle, as you can see there. Some were in 22 long, and almost none were in 22 short. It had 2 barrel bands. It had a cleaning rod. There was no figure groove in the forearm. The rear sight was either a Hotchkiss rear sight or a 1901 Craig rear sight. And the rear sight was mounted on the barrel several inches forward of the receiver. So here are the pictures. Top one is the one with the Hotchkiss sight, and the bottom one is the one with the Craig sight. As you can see, 2 barrel bands. The barrel bands are retained by a spring, got a cleaning rod, high wall action, and the sights are down the barrel a little bit. Okay, made those till 1911. Mostly civilian sales, mostly to military academies, military schools. The Boy Scouts got involved with target shooting about this time. Again, there was an interest in the country in this type of rifle. Variation 2, generally recognized after 1911 up to 1917. There's a breakout of the calibers based on a current database of people checking all the Winchester Winder muskets that they can find, and that's the breakout of what the calibers are. It went from variation 1, which had 2 barrel bands, to variation 2 that has a single barrel band, also retained by a spring, and they moved the rear sight to just adjacent to the receiver. And the rear sight settled on the Craig rear sight. Well, come about 1917, the U.S., which had been neutral as much as it could stand, gets involved in World War I. General Pershing apparently was a big advocate for training folks before they came overseas. He says, I don't have time, I don't have the range. We're using ranges that the French are using for crops. When the crops start growing, we can't shoot on their ranges. Because the folks have to be trained on how to shoot before they get here. We'll train them on trench combat and that sort of thing once they get here. But they need to know what they're doing with a gun in their hands before that. So the Army made 2 big orders. They ordered in excess of 30,000 Winder muskets to help with that. Production started in 1918. Not all of them got delivered before the end of the war, and contracts were canceled. The ones that were delivered, and not all the variation 3s here went to the military. There were still some that ended up in civilian sales, but about 95% of them went to the military in this initial production run. And they went to Springfield Armory, and Springfield stamped them there on the tang behind the hammer, U.S. with the ordnance, the flaming ordnance bomb. Okay, there's mine, and there's like 3 other Winder muskets here. I didn't look. Do they all have bombs on them? U.S. and the bomb? Mark? And who's got the third one?
Yeah.
Yours all do?
Yeah.
Mine doesn't.
Yours is more rare.
Exactly. Well, yeah. And it's more rare than you think, actually, I think. After the war, Winchester marketed them as a Model 87 in their catalog, and nobody I read about has any idea where that number came from. They did continue to produce them in really small numbers after the war, and then in 1923 they produced 200 and some with all the parts that were left over, and I think that's what mine is from that batch. It was replaced in the military use as a training rifle in 1922 by the model 1922, which was a 22 version of the Springfield 03. And those ended up, the Winder muskets ended up getting sold through the Department of Civilian Marksmanship on the civilian market. Military calibers, as you can see, they're almost all made in 22 short. And there is one documented case of one that's made in and marked 22 long rifle. The ones that are not marked by U.S., the ones that were made for the civilian market, the breakout's a little bit different. Still 81% of them were made in 22 short. They still used a high wall receiver, but they cut the sides down so it looks like a low wall. So what you have is something that looks like a low wall, but takes the larger barrel shank that the high wall took. And instead of having a sight mounted on the barrel, it has the Lyman number 53 sight, peep sight mounted on the receiver. And that's what I think all four of these have that sight. That got cut off, but there's a quote here from General Pershing on the need for marksmanship before they come down range to France, and he advocated for and was probably the impetus behind the big Army contracts for the Winder musket. This was published in Arms and Demand magazine. That's the predecessor to the American Rifleman, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, here's a picture of the Variation 3. As you can see, again, no cleaning rod, single barrel band. The barrel band is no longer retained by a spring, but by a screw that goes through the barrel band and screws into the other side of it. And then you got your receiver mount with your diamond sight on the receiver. Oh, I forgot to mention, also has the finger groove there. Variation 2 and Variation 3 has a finger groove in the forearm. All right, those are my sources. That surplus.com, Bert Hartman, that's an excellent article, and I got most of the pictures for this presentation from his article, and he's got the database of checking all the current winders that everyone's submitted currently in his database, and that's where we get the percentages for the breakout of caliber. All right. Faster and funnier. Questions? Sir?
Current prices on the market?
A whole lot more than $500, I'll tell you that. Chesterfield Arms had one at our spring show last year, and he had $18.95 on it, but he said he was willing to work with me, and I almost, if I hadn't found this one on Gunbroker, I would have gone to him at the next Chantilly show and probably bought that one. I got this one for a lot less than that, but they're still $1,500 and above. In any kind of shape. Now, Bill will tell you, a lot of them, the bluing on the receiver has actually flaked, so that the percentage of bluing on most receivers is less than 50% that you'll see. And that is apparently from gun clubs hanging them on the wall and moisture from being close to the wall, not evaporating, but actually getting under the bluing and flaking it off. Something like that. I don't know.
No, that's what a member that I bought mine from told me. And he said you'll notice the same thing with 30s, 20s and 30s Airs, Model 94 Winchesters. Because they always put them so that the ejection port, that loading port was facing out, just like the sights would face out. And so it's against that. And I know my grandfather had this ancient bolt-action shotgun that he would kill rats in the hen house with. And it was all flaked on the whole side of it from one end to the other, because it sat on the wall on the chimney, which would get moisture. I don't know what it is that they make it. Someone asked me what the gluing is, but it flakes off. And it's a very different looking gluing than you're used to seeing on those rifles.
Yeah, it's not at all unusual to see that flaked off on the receivers. Also, just FYI, the variation 1s and 2s had the sights mounted on the barrel. The variation 3 barrels will not be drilled and tapped for a sight. So when you look at your variation 3s, which all of these are, there should not be any holes in the barrel for mounting a sight there. Yes, sir.
One of the things for me is I like shooting. I mentioned that. Have you shot it?
I just picked this. Well, no, unfortunately, no. It's in the line for the next time I go to the range, but I haven't been shooting, I regret to say, for probably 4 or 5 months. So I got this last fall, and I just haven't had a chance to shoot.
Well, to me, that's the joy of...
Oh, absolutely. I shoot every gun I have. All the weird calibers that I have,
Me too.
I shoot every one of them.
Me too.
Yeah, Bill, you hear that? You shoot them, right?
If you get out there,
We have this argument all the time. He buys guns to put them in the gun safe. I don't understand that.
Yes, sir.
I have a general question about 18-inch class. Were the high walls mostly used for the larger calibers?
Yes.
And the low walls for the small? Okay.
Yep, that's correct. But Winder wanted the rigidity and the extra weight of the barrel, so that's why he chose the high wall action. The Army wanted to cut down to a low wall configuration when they bought the Variation 3, because it was really tough to get a 22 short in the chamber with the two sides of the receiver. They're kind of blocking your thumb going in. So the Army, that's why the Army they said, we want that receiver, the high wall receiver, but cut it down so we can load it more easily. That's why they did that.
I saw one at Chantilly probably about 5 years ago. It had the US and the bomb on it, but it was a takedown, and it had the sight on the barrel at the very rear. One of the, looked like the Krag sight. And I had never ever seen one. It was in 22 long rifle. Now I don't know, it looked identical to the ones that are here as far as the impression. And the US was never marked as one. It was two separate dies, U and
Right.
an S. And so they're never going to be perfectly squared up. And
Right.
that's the way this was. I wanted a lot of money for it.
You say that was a variation 3?
These are all Variation
Yeah, because I thought there weren't a variation 3s that were takedowns.
There weren't.
Okay.
No, this was an
But-
earlier variation that was a takedown.
But yet you said it was US proofed.
It did
it's-
have US marks on it.
Unless, no, I don't have an
It
explanation
did
for it.
not look like an owner-added enhancement. It looked like it, and given the way they wanted to get them in the war, I wouldn't be surprised, just like in World War II, Mossberg rifles that were never trainers got marked because they were used.
Yeah, that could be, but contract Variation 3s, none of them were takedowns. Sir?
So were the ones that were actually acquired by the U.S. Army, were these actually used, because I noticed that the whole batch, of course, the class variation in particular was bought during the World War I time frame. So to your knowledge, were these used as part of initial military training for recruits, or were these all pretty much given to or issued to the ROTCs, the gun clubs, and things like that?
My understanding is they went to the ROTCs and to the National Guard units. I didn't see anywhere that it said they were used for initial training, basic training for Army recruits.